Hi there, it's Larold, and today I want to talk about the patch 10.1.5 PTR and some pretty humongous changes that are being made to some of the tank classes, specifically Brewmaster Monk. There are some maybe less impactful in terms of the way you play, but still very impactful changes happening to like gearing and just damage output, damage tuning that are going to affect all of the tanks. But then Brewmaster Monk is staring down the barrel of one of the biggest changes I've ever seen to any spec. I was gonna say any tank, and any spec at the same time. Any spank. One of the biggest sets of changes I've ever seen to any spank. It's pretty crazy. It's gonna change your rotation, your gearing priority, obviously your talent setup. Pretty huge stuff. Now, bear in mind, all of this is on the PTR, so there's a very real possibility that it could be iterated upon, but it's something I wanted to go ahead and kind of work on and get out there now so that people can kind of get ahead of the curve when it comes to gearing up for this, because, if this does wind up going through and changing the way that you gear as a Brewmaster Monk, you're probably not going to be too thrilled to find that out on patch day and be in a situation where all of your really nice optimal gear is now suboptimal and crap. So let's dive into the more generic stuff that's happening to all tanks. As expected, Blizzard is lowering the effectiveness of all primordial stones that deal damage. This is the Onyx Annulet ring that people have been using. It was introduced in patch 10.0.5, and I think Blizzard made the right idea by not nerfing it when 10.1 came around. It would have been pretty annoying to farm up that ring, spend the time getting all the stones unlocked and leveled up, and having a couple of rings set up if you were being really serious on your characters, to only then immediately have that nerfed within a couple of weeks or months of acquiring it. Pretty frustrating. That being said, right now, it is, just to use some logs here from this week's most recent kills on a couple of bosses. Here's Rashok on my Paladin. The Primordial Stones, again, a ring, is about 9.5% of my total damage. Using Echo of Neltharion on my Monk, a ring is about 8.5% of my total damage. It's right on there with a best-in-slot Trinket. That's kind of too much, man. And yeah, I think, for one, it's kind of annoying that my item level is being weighed down by this this ring from last patch. But on the other hand, I'm definitely going to use a ring that's worth 8 to 10% more damage. So by cutting that down, it makes it so that you're just going to switch over to using a normal stat budget ring at the highest item level that you can get it. And that's going to be true of all the tanks. Now, one thing that Blizzard has done here that's kind of clever, as you can see with Blood Death Knight, they're increasing the ability damage for the spec by 8%. They're kind of doing this with all of the specs that they found were using that ring a lot. But they're also using this as a bit of a tuning knob. Blood DK's damage, their defenses are great, their utility is great when you need grips, their defensive cooldowns, all that. Yeah, they're in great shape defensively, but their damage sucks. So they're giving them an 8% damage bonus. But Vengeance, which has great damage output, kind of less utility and defensive value, although still quite a good tank, but high on the damage end, only getting a 4% damage increase. So they are, relatively speaking, getting a small nerf. Blood DK, I don't even really know that Blood DK is getting that much of a buff, because if we go back and look at this, Paladin, Brewmaster Monk, basically all of the tanks, you only get about 50 to 60% of your total damage out of your skills. A very large amount of this comes out of trinkets, the ring which is being removed, but also armor affixes like the slimy expulsion boots or toxic thorn boots if you're a leather wearer, shadow flame armor patches, or the frostfire belt if you're a plate wearer. That kind of sources of damage that are not a part of your class ability kit. These are only buffs to your ability damage. So they're not quite as impactful as like 8% more damage for Blood DK. This actually winds up being more like 4.5 to 5% more damage. Vengeance Demon Hunter, 2 to 3% more damage, which, yeah, kind of winds up being a nerf. For Bear Druid, it's 6%, so kind of in the middle. They're really pretty noticeably targeting the overperforming damage dealing tanks and kind of bringing them back down a bit in Vengeance Demon Hunter. and Prot Paladin, just to skip over Monk there real quickly, because that is where there's a nice big wall of text. And then in the case of, say, Blood DK and Prot Warrior, who are underperforming a little bit, they're kind of giving them a little more juice. Actually, Prot Warrior is surprisingly a little less than you might expect at only 6%, considering in raid their damage has suffered a lot due to really the design of the raid and forcing Prot Warriors to have to hit Ignore Pain quite a lot because there's so much unblockable damage in that raid. In Mythic Plus, Prot Warriors' damage is still pretty respectable, so, you know, this is fine there. And now let's move on to Brewmaster Monk, and this is really the crux of what I want to go over here. First off, Brewmaster Monk is getting a nice 7% ability damage increase. Brewmasters were a top level damage dealing tank to start off the patch, and that was because Weapons of Order, the damage increase buff, was still applying to item effects. So you would stack up your Weapons of Order, then pop your trinket, and it would do 32% more damage. They nerfed that on the 13th day of Prague while we were still working on Mythic Sarkareth, and it was very frustrating to come back from the dinner break and find that I was doing 15,000 DPS less than I had been in the first phase of the fight. Frustrating, but, you know, what can you do? They compensated by giving a couple of small little buffs to Brewmaster's damage, not enough to make up that huge damage gap. Maybe around half the way, maybe not even quite that much. Definitely a little frustrating, and we're seeing here Rising Sun Kick and Blackout Kick damage increased again by 20%. That is basically the same buff that they already did. Throwing it in again, okay, I'm certainly not going to complain. As well as a 7% across the board ability damage increase. Good. Tiger Palm and Invoke Nizal, the Black Ox, damage increased by 50%. Those are both relatively small components of your total damage pool, but again, who's going to complain about a little more damage, even if it is a very small amount, 0.5% of your total damage. What really is interesting and game-changing here is this new talent, Press the Advantage. Your auto attacks reduce the cooldown on your brews by half a second and block your target's chi. Basically, they just do extra damage and cause them to take 1% increased damage from your abilities for 10 seconds. Now, the way this actually works is not a debuff on the target, it's actually a buff on yourself. So it gives you 1% more damage per stack. Once you hit 10 stacks, your next cast of Rising Sun Kick or Keg Smash consumes all of those stacks to hit 2 times. And that bonus effect triggers all the effects on behalf of Tiger Palm. Replaces Tiger Palm. So the way that this works is like a Protection Warrior's Devastator. It makes it so that all of your auto attacks now have this extra loaded up component of damage and stacking damage buff. And then this last line here, this bonus attack can trigger effects on behalf of Tiger Palm at reduced effectiveness. Now the way that this works is Blackout Combo, which increases the damage of Tiger Palm by 100%, and Face Palm, which has a 50% chance to make Tiger Palm do triple damage. When you're at 10 stacks of Press the Advantage and you hit, you have Blackout Combo active, you hit Rising Sun Kick, it's now getting, if we could look at the combat log here, the first Rising Sun Kick is hitting for 44k, the second one is critting for 131,000 damage, because it's not only getting this damage buff from Blackout Combo to Tiger Palm, instead applying to the Rising Sun Kick, pretty nice, it's also got that 50% chance of being face palmed for an extra triple damage. Now these are reduced a little bit, but still, this is pretty huge in terms of the amount of damage that it can add with, either spending all of these 10 stacks of Press the Advantage on Rising Sun Kick and single target, or if we wanted to just get a brew on cooldown here, and now I just have to sit and wait for myself to actually auto attack 10 times successfully without missing. Here we go. All right, 24 seconds left on the cooldown, and it takes almost 9 whole seconds off. Almost 10 whole seconds off of the cooldown, because both of the Keg Smashes that hit are reducing brew cooldown. So there's a lot of value built into this talent. Because it is tied to auto attacks, it makes it so that dual wielding is massively more important than using a two-hander. To the point that actually, if you only have a two-hander available, you literally wouldn't use this talent. Now, there are some ways that Blizzard could fix this. They could make it so that if you have a two-hander, you get 2 stacks per auto attack. That would be the best fix. There is the dual wield mischance, which does make it so that dual wielding is a little over 2 to 2.5 times more valuable than a two-hander at the current state of this talent's design, but it's a pretty fixable situation. What this also does is it makes it so that Wind Fury Totem is insanely valuable for Brewmaster Monk. Maybe the best spec in the game for Wind Fury Totem. It makes it so that Haste, of all stats, becomes insanely valuable for Brewmaster Monk, to the point that you're going to want to stack Haste. And that's actually why I felt compelled to make this video at this point. This is very speculative. This could get changed tomorrow. But in the meantime, I'm going to be focusing on getting 2 one-handers of very high item level and getting Haste gear, because the potential here is that, at least from Sims and some of the testing that we've seen, this stands to be like a 20,000 DPS increase for Brewmaster Monk in single target. Kind of buried the lead there. Massive damage increase, massive shift in the way that you play. You know, you're going into the Wind Fury group, you're stacking Haste, you're auto-attacking. There will be gaps in your play, like you're gonna want to potentially sit on Rising Sun Kick's cooldown for a second or two to get to that 10th stack of Press the Advantage. Potentially, because you're going to want to, in single target, spend all of those Press the Advantage buffs on Rising Sun Kick. It's a very, very different playstyle, potentially. It also may never see the light of day. You know, this may get scrapped, completely trashed, and then that's that. It does come at the cost of using Weapons of Order, which is really not something that bothers me at all. I've never really loved Weapons of Order. It was always the best option as far as Covenants went throughout Shadowlands, just from a numerical standpoint, so I always played it. But it's not really a great burst damage cooldown. You know, it gives you an extra keg smash to use as your, like, burst window. It's a 30-second buff with a 10-second sort of window afterwards, so it's sort of like a 40-second ramped up damage increase, but it's just not very good for burst. You know, it's not like throwing an exploding keg at an enemy. It's got some setup and then a bunch of ramp, so if mobs die or move out of range or whatever, there's a lot of situations where it can not really be that great of a talent. So I've never really loved it. So giving that up to run Press the Advantage instead is pretty appealing. You know, it really makes the class a lot simpler. You're losing multiple keybinds that you have to use. You know, you're not having to use Weapons of Order in your opener at all anymore, or at all. You're not having to use Tiger Palm anymore. You're actually not spinning Crane Kicking to fill gaps in your rotation either, because you don't want to lose any auto attacks, and spinning Crane Kick does make it so that you can't auto attack while that channel is going on. So there are spots where you actually will have downtime in your rotation. Not really my favorite, but the potential to gain 20,000 DPS and lose a couple of keybinds on a Brewmaster Monk, very appealing, very nice. And finally, the way that this works, the Press the Advantage procs trigger Chi Surge, if I can mouse over it correctly. Here we are. They trigger Chi Surge. So, as we can see here, I'm auto-attacking. I've definitely gotten up to 10 stacks. Press the button, bam, Chi Surge proc. You know, huge damage proc with incredible consistency. Way more damage coming from that than you would have ever gotten out of triggering Chi Surge on Weapons of Order every 2 minutes. Pretty cool. So I think that's about all I had to say here. I'm very excited for patch 10.1.5, the potential to completely revolutionize the way that you play Brewmaster Monk, a spec that has been overly complicated and unfortunately not really doing enough damage for how complex and difficult it is to play. Seeing that potential for a massive change to the spec is really interesting, really appealing. Again, crazy change from Blizzard to do this huge of a shift in power and playstyle and gearing just like in a 0.5 patch, but I'm all for it because Brewmaster Monk does need something different. You know, it's a little too complicated and doesn't really perform as well as it should. All right, that's it. Thank you for watching. Bye.